The Confederation of Civilized Worlds had spent approximately 3,000 years perfecting the art of diplomatic condescension, and they were rather proud of their achievement. Their crowning jewel was Station Harmonious VIV, a gleaming monument to bureaucratic efficiency that orbited the neutral zone between 17 different stellar empires. Here, in carefully climate-controlled chambers that smelled faintly of disinfectant and broken dreams, first contact protocols were executed with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The station's inhabitants belonged to various species, each more smugly advanced than the last. There were the crystalline Vorthak, who communicated through light patterns and considered verbal speech a barbaric relic. The gaseous nebulites floated in specialized containment suits, looking down on anyone unfortunate enough to require solid matter for existence. But the crown jewel of telepathic superiority belonged to the Zephyans, whose elongated skulls housed brains capable of reading thoughts across star systems. Ambassador Klix-Vorth was the station's premier mind reader, a distinction he wore like an expensive suit that nobody else could afford. His species had evolved beyond the crude necessity of verbal communication roughly 2 millennia ago, developing telepathic abilities that made them the galaxy's unofficial psychological profilers. When new species arrived for their diplomatic debut, Klix-Vorth would perform what the Confederation euphemistically called a mental compatibility assessment, which, in practical terms, meant rummaging through alien thoughts like a cosmic burglar with a psychology degree. The process had become so routine that the station's other diplomats had started placing bets on the results. The crystalline delegates wagered on how many primitive fears they'd catalogue, while the nebulites speculated about the complexity of newcomer emotional patterns. It was all terribly civilized, in the way that only beings who had forgotten what it meant to struggle could manage. This particular rotation cycle, however, promised something different. The latest species requesting admission to the Confederation called themselves humans, and their preliminary reports were fascinatingly contradictory. They claimed to come from a world where multiple species had somehow avoided destroying each other, where warfare and cooperation existed in baffling parallel, and where something called creativity was considered a virtue rather than a mental disorder. Klix-Vorth reviewed the files with the kind of professional boredom that came from centuries of cataloging predictable alien psyches. Humans appeared to be bipedal mammals with embarrassingly short lifespans and a peculiar obsession with something they called coffee. Their technology was primitive by Confederation standards. They still used physical controls for their spacecraft and hadn't even discovered telepathic navigation. Most amusing of all, they seemed to conduct their diplomacy through a combination of spoken language and facial expressions, like some sort of elaborate charade game. The ambassador settled into his specialized reading chair, a device that amplified his telepathic abilities to uncomfortable levels. His previous subjects had ranged from the militaristic horde collective, whose thoughts moved in orderly formations, to the artistic dreamweavers, whose minds produced pleasant, if repetitive, mental symphonies. Each species had its quirks, but they all followed predictable patterns once you understood their evolutionary psychology. The human representative was scheduled to arrive within the hour, and Klix-Vorth had already prepared his standard assessment templates. He expected to find the usual primitive concerns, territorial disputes, resource allocation anxiety, perhaps some quaint tribal loyalty patterns. The betting pool suggested this would be another quick catalog job, 2 hours at most, with time left over for the evening's meditation session. Dr. Quintal Morks, the station's chief medical officer, stopped by for the pre-session briefing. Her species, the Analytical Collective, approached everything with scientific precision, which made her observations particularly valuable. The human's physiological readings are within normal parameters for carbon-based life, she reported, consulting her multi-dimensional datapad. Brain activity is surprisingly high for a species of their technological level, but nothing we haven't seen before. Any particular mental preparation recommendations? Klix-Vorth inquired, though he already knew the answer. 3,000 years of diplomatic mind reading had established fairly standard protocols. Standard neural buffers should be sufficient, Quintal Morks replied, though their brain chemistry includes some unusual compounds. Something called caffeine appears to be a regular component of their system, possibly a mild stimulant. Klix-Vorth nodded absently. Stimulants were common among primitive species. The warrior races often used them before battle, and the artistic species incorporated them into their creative processes. It was nothing his enhanced telepathic capabilities couldn't handle. The arrival announcement echoed through the diplomatic wing precisely on schedule. Human representative Tank Kowalski now boarding at Docking Bay 7. The name itself was almost comically primitive. Harsh consonants strung together without any of the elegant flowing sounds that characterized civilized languages. Klix-Vorth made his way to the reception chamber, where first meetings were conducted according to strict protocol. The room had been designed to accommodate various atmospheric requirements while maintaining an atmosphere of sophisticated neutrality. Soft lighting, comfortable seating arrangements, and subtle displays of Confederation achievements lined the walls. Tank Kowalski entered the chamber with the kind of casual confidence that immediately marked him as either very naive or very dangerous. He stood roughly 6 feet tall, built like someone who had spent considerable time moving heavy objects, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything without appearing particularly impressed by any of it. His clothing was functional rather than ceremonial, some sort of dark blue uniform with minimal decoration. Ambassador Klix-Vorth, I presume. Tank extended his hand in what appeared to be some sort of greeting ritual. Heard you're the guy who reads minds around here. That's got to be interesting work. The casual tone immediately marked him as a species unaccustomed to diplomatic protocol, though Klix-Vorth had encountered worse. Indeed, I conduct mental compatibility assessments for the Confederation. It helps us understand how new species might integrate with our existing diplomatic frameworks. Tank nodded and settled into the provided chair with the easy grace of someone completely unintimidated by the grandeur around him. Makes sense. So how does this work? Do I need to think about anything specific, or do you just root around in there like you're looking for car keys? The metaphor was lost on Klix-Vorth, but he appreciated the human's direct approach. Simply relax and allow your mind to function naturally. I'll establish a light telepathic connection and observe your thought patterns. Most species find the process quite comfortable. Sounds easy enough? Tank leaned back in his chair. Fair warning, though. I've got about 15 different things running through my head at any given moment. Hope that doesn't throw off your equipment. Klix-Vorth smiled the way adults smile at children who think they understand complex subjects. Multiple thought streams were hardly unusual among sentient species. The hive mind collective routinely maintained thousands of simultaneous consciousness threads, and his telepathic training had prepared him for far more complex mental architectures than anything a primitive species could produce. He activated his neural enhancement array and extended his consciousness toward the human's mind. The initial contact felt routine, warm organic thought patterns with the expected electromagnetic signature of a carbon-based brain. Klix-Vorth settled into his professional rhythm, preparing to catalogue the usual primitive concerns. Then Tank's mind opened up and everything went spectacularly wrong. The first wave hit like a tsunami of caffeine-fueled chaos. Instead of the orderly thought streams Klix-Vorth expected, he encountered what could only be described as mental television, with 500 channels playing simultaneously. Tank was simultaneously wondering whether the alien's head shape meant he was compensating for something, remembering a song about a dancing lobster, calculating the odds that the station's artificial gravity would fail during his visit, planning his dinner menu for the next week, composing a letter to his sister, rehearsing comebacks for arguments that hadn't happened yet, and running a detailed mental simulation of what would happen if he started doing jumping jacks right now. But that was just the surface layer. Deeper in Tank's consciousness, Klix-Vorth discovered an entire secondary narrative where the human was providing running commentary on the telepathic experience itself. This is weird, Tank's internal voice observed. I can feel him poking around in here. Should I think about something embarrassing just to mess with him? No, that would be unprofessional. Although it would be pretty funny. I wonder if he can sense that I'm thinking about embarrassing things. This is like that recursive loop problem from philosophy class, except with brain-reading aliens. Simultaneously, Tank was conducting a detailed analysis of the chamber's architecture, wondering about the structural integrity of the transparent aluminium walls, mentally composing a report for his supervisors, and maintaining a continuous background process that seemed to be cataloging every possible way the diplomatic meeting could go wrong. Klix-Vorth tried to focus on individual thought streams, but they kept branching and merging like some sort of cognitive river delta. Every concept led to 3 more concepts, each accompanied by emotional responses that ranged from mild curiosity to inexplicable amusement. The human's mind seemed incapable of focusing on a single topic for more than a few seconds, but somehow maintained perfect coherence across dozens of simultaneous mental processes. Things got worse when Tank's pattern recognition systems kicked in. The human brain began analyzing Klix-Vorth's telepathic technique, comparing it to various fictional mind-reading scenarios, and developing theoretical countermeasures, all while maintaining a cheerful internal monologue about whether aliens had concepts of personal space and if telepathy counted as a violation of privacy laws. "I wonder if this guy ever gets bored reading minds," Tank mused internally. "Probably gets a lot of the same stuff. Fear, aggression, territorial concerns, mating rituals. Must be like being a therapist, except you can't charge by the hour. I should think about something interesting for him." What would be interesting to a telepathic alien? Probably human creativity, right? Everyone always says humans are creative. Then Tank's mind helpfully began generating what he considered creative thoughts, a rapid-fire sequence of ridiculous scenarios involving diplomatic incidents, improvised musical performances, and detailed plans for teaching aliens to play poker. Each scenario branched into sub-scenarios, complete with dialogue, character development, and environmental details that would have impressed professional novelists. Klix-Vorth felt his neural buffers beginning to overload. 3,000 years of diplomatic mind-reading had not prepared him for a consciousness that treated focused attention as a suggestion, rather than a requirement. The human brain seemed to operate on principles that violated everything the Confederation understood about sentient psychology. The situation deteriorated further when Tank's social anxiety systems activated. Despite his outward confidence, the human was internally rehearsing the diplomatic meeting, running through dozens of potential conversation branches while simultaneously critiquing his own performance and maintaining detailed awareness of everyone else's emotional states. His mind was constantly monitoring for signs of approval, disapproval, boredom, or hostility, not out of fear, but from what appeared to be ingrained social processing algorithms. "Hope I'm not boring him," Tank thought, while simultaneously analyzing the diplomatic implications of 17 different response strategies. These telepathic species probably get tired of primitive emotional patterns. Should I try to think about something more sophisticated? What counts as sophisticated to a mind reader? Probably abstract concepts. Mathematics? Philosophy? No, wait. They probably find human philosophy primitive too. Maybe I should just think about normal stuff and let him draw his own conclusions. Normal stuff, as it turned out, included a comprehensive mental database of human popular culture, detailed memories of every embarrassing moment from Tank's adolescence, an ongoing internal debate about whether artificial intelligence would eventually replace diplomatic personnel, and a background process that was apparently composing limericks about aliens. Klix-Vorth's enhanced telepathic capabilities, designed to handle the most complex alien psychologies, began experiencing something that could only be described as cognitive indigestion. The human mind refused to conform to any known pattern of sentient thought. It was simultaneously primitive and sophisticated, chaotic and organized, focused and scattered. Tank's consciousness seemed to operate like a quantum computer running on caffeine and creative writing exercises. The breakthrough moment came when Tank's mind began analyzing the telepathic connection itself, treating it as an interesting technical challenge rather than a diplomatic procedure. Fascinating, Tank mused internally. He's using some sort of electromagnetic field to interface with neural activity, probably evolved from natural empathic abilities. I wonder if human brains could develop similar capabilities given enough evolutionary pressure. Actually, some humans claim to have psychic abilities already, though most of that's probably wishful thinking and pattern recognition errors. Then Tank's brain helpfully began generating detailed theoretical frameworks for human telepathic development, complete with evolutionary timelines, potential social implications, and speculative technology applications. Each theory spawned counter-theories, all of which were simultaneously evaluated for logical consistency, while Tank maintained perfect awareness of the ongoing diplomatic situation. Klix-Vorth realized he was experiencing something unprecedented in Confederation history, cognitive overload from a species that was supposed to be primitive. The human mind wasn't just chaotic, it was organized chaos, structured randomness, purposeful confusion. Tank's consciousness operated like a high-performance multitasking system that had somehow achieved self-awareness and decided to use its capabilities for continuous creative problem-solving. The final straw came when Tank's pattern-matching algorithms identified the telepathic connection as similar to computer networking protocols and began attempting to establish a two-way link. "Hey," Tank thought with sudden interest, "if he can read my thoughts, maybe I can figure out how to read his. This could be like mental internet, except with actual minds instead of cat videos and political arguments." The human brain began probing the telepathic connection with the systematic curiosity of a species that had learned to reverse engineer alien technology. Tank wasn't trying to invade Klix-Vorth's mind, he was simply treating the telepathic link as an interesting puzzle that might yield useful information about alien psychology and communication methods. For a species that had developed telepathy over millennia of careful evolution, the concept of a primitive mind, casually attempting to hack their neural networks, was roughly equivalent to watching a toddler successfully perform brain surgery with kitchen utensils. Klix-Vorth's carefully constructed mental defenses, designed to protect him from hostile telepathic species, proved completely inadequate against a mind that wasn't trying to attack him, but was simply too chaotically curious for standard protection protocols. Tank's consciousness began mapping the telepathic connection with the same methodical approach he might use to troubleshoot a computer network, cataloging signal patterns and analyzing response times. The ambassador's enhanced telepathic abilities, confronted with a mind that refused to follow any known rules of sentient psychology, began experiencing what could only be described as a philosophical crisis. Everything the Confederation understood about intelligence, consciousness, and mental development suggested that Tank's brain should not be capable of functioning at all, let alone maintaining coherent thought across dozens of simultaneous processes, while casually attempting to reverse engineer telepathic technology. The realization that humans represented a completely unknown form of sentient psychology triggered every mental alarm system Klix-Vorth possessed. His enhanced neural network, designed to catalog and understand alien minds, began trying to process the implications of a species whose consciousness violated fundamental assumptions about how intelligence worked. Tank, meanwhile, had become fascinated by the telepathic connection and was now conducting what amounted to real-time scientific research on alien mental communication. His internal monologue had shifted to detailed analysis of signal propagation, neural interface protocols, and speculative applications for human-alien communication systems. "This is incredible," Tank thought, with genuine enthusiasm. "If humans could develop similar capabilities, it would revolutionize diplomacy, education, scientific collaboration, basically everything. I wonder if this is how they conduct all their international relations, or if they still use primitive methods like written contracts and verbal agreements for legal purposes." The human brain began generating detailed implementation strategies for human telepathic development, complete with training programs, safety protocols, and ethical guidelines. Each plan was simultaneously evaluated for technical feasibility, social acceptance, and potential unintended consequences, all while Tank maintained perfect awareness of the diplomatic situation and continued his analysis of the alien mental interface. Klix-Vorth's neural buffers, overwhelmed by the sheer cognitive chaos of the human mind, began shutting down in sequence. His enhanced telepathic abilities, confronted with a consciousness that operated according to completely unknown principles, triggered emergency protective protocols designed to prevent permanent mental damage. The ambassador's last coherent thought, before his neural network initiated a complete system shutdown, was a desperate realization that the Confederation's 3,000 years of diplomatic superiority had just encountered something that rendered their entire psychological framework obsolete. Tank, noticing that the telepathic connection had suddenly gone quiet, opened his eyes to find Klix-Vorth unconscious in his reading chair, with what appeared to be steam coming out of his elongated ears. "Ha ha," Tank observed mildly. "That's probably not supposed to happen." Dr. Quintal Morks arrived within minutes, summoned by automated medical alerts that had detected Klix-Vorth's neural shutdown. Her scanner readings showed patterns she had never encountered in 3 centuries of medical practice. Complete telepathic overload, with traces of what could only be described as cognitive feedback loops. "What exactly happened here?" she demanded, running additional scans on the unconscious ambassador. Tank shrugged with the casual attitude of someone who had broken expensive equipment through no fault of his own. "We were doing the mind-reading thing, and then he just started making weird noises and fell over. Is he going to be okay?" The medical officer's scans showed that Klix-Vorth's enhanced neural network had essentially rebooted itself, wiping all short-term memory buffers and shutting down advanced cognitive functions as a protective measure. It was the telepathic equivalent of a computer crashing after trying to process too much data. "His neural pathways are showing signs of severe overstimulation," Quintal Morks reported. "It's as if his telepathic abilities encountered something they couldn't process and shut down to prevent permanent damage." "That's weird," Tank replied thoughtfully. "I wasn't trying to think about anything complicated, just normal stuff. Work, family, whether you guys have coffee on this station, that sort of thing." Normal stuff, it turned out, was a significant understatement. When Klix-Vorth eventually regained consciousness, his first words were a stream of incoherent babbling about chaotic multithreading, recursive social algorithms, and impossible pattern recognition matrices. It took several hours of careful medical treatment before he could form complete sentences, and even then he kept referring to Tank as the cognitive paradox and muttering about mental architectures that violated the laws of psychology. The diplomatic implications were immediate and far-reaching. Within hours, Tank's encounter with the station's premier Telepathic had generated emergency sessions among the Confederation leadership. The official report, filed under unprecedented psychological phenomena, resulted in humans being temporarily classified as a mentally hazardous species, pending further investigation. Word of the incident spread through the galactic diplomatic community, with the speed that only truly embarrassing news can achieve. The Zephyrians, who had built their entire civilization around telepathic superiority, found themselves confronted with the uncomfortable reality that their most advanced mind reader had been incapacitated by what they had assumed was a primitive species. Tank, for his part, seemed genuinely concerned about Klix-Vorth's welfare and offered to participate in any additional testing that might help understand what had gone wrong. This attitude of helpful cooperation only made the situation more disturbing for the Confederation leadership, who were beginning to realize that humans might represent something entirely outside their existing frameworks for understanding intelligence. The recovery process for Klix-Vorth took several weeks and required specialized treatment from the galaxy's leading telepathic psychologists. Even after his neural functions had returned to normal, he retained an almost phobic reaction to the concept of human mental contact. His detailed debriefing reports described the human mind as a cognitive hurricane, with the organizational complexity of a quantum computer and the emotional stability of a caffeine-prevented chaos engine. The Confederation's subsequent attempts to understand human psychology involved extensive long-distance observation and carefully controlled experiments with volunteers who had been extensively briefed on the potential risks. These studies revealed that Tank's mental architecture was not unusual among humans. If anything, he represented the lower end of human multitasking capability. The discovery that humans routinely maintain dozens of simultaneous thought processes while conducting complex social interactions forced a complete revision of Confederation theories about sentient psychology. Their existing models had assumed that advanced intelligence required focused, organized thinking patterns. Humans appeared to have achieved comparable intelligence through exactly the opposite approach: distributed, parallel processing that treated mental chaos as a feature rather than a bug. 6 months after the incident, Klix-Vorth had been reassigned to what the Confederation diplomatically termed safer duties. His new position involved cataloging the psychology of crystalline species, whose thoughts moved in predictable geometric patterns and never attempted to reverse engineer telepathic connections. He had also begun offering consultation services to other telepathic species, warning them about the unique challenges posed by human mental contact. Tank, meanwhile, had been promoted within the human diplomatic corps and assigned the unofficial title of Cognitive Warfare Specialist. His mere presence at diplomatic meetings had proven remarkably effective at encouraging alien cooperation, since no species wanted to risk having their telepaths experience what had become known throughout the galaxy as Kowalski syndrome. The human diplomatic program had expanded significantly as word spread about their unusual mental properties. Species that had never shown interest in human contact suddenly found themselves curious about beings whose thoughts could incapacitate trained telepaths. The Confederation's assumption that humans were a primitive species had been replaced by a more cautious assessment that classified them as cognitively exotic and potentially hazardous to standard diplomatic personnel. Tank's success had led to the development of specialized training programs for human diplomats, focusing on techniques for maintaining normal thought processes while in the presence of telepathic species. Ironically, the biggest challenge was teaching humans to think less rather than more. Their natural tendency toward complex multitasking proved overwhelming for most alien telepaths. The broader implications of human mental architecture continued to ripple through galactic civilization. The discovery that intelligence could develop along completely different evolutionary paths challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness, creativity, and the nature of sentient thought. Several species had begun experimenting with techniques designed to increase their own cognitive flexibility, though none had achieved anything approaching human levels of organized chaos. The Confederation's diplomatic protocols had been extensively revised to include warnings about species with non-standard cognitive architectures. New regulations required extensive psychological preparation for any telepath assigned to human contact, along with emergency medical support and mandatory recovery periods following mental interface attempts. Tank himself had become something of a celebrity within certain scientific circles, though he remained largely unaware of his fame. His casual attitude toward the entire situation, treating the incapacitation of a premier telepathic diplomat as an interesting technical problem rather than a diplomatic crisis, had only reinforced alien perceptions of humans as a cognitively unpredictable species. The final irony was that the Confederation's 3,000-year tradition of diplomatic superiority through mental manipulation had been undone not by a species with superior telepathic abilities, but by beings whose thoughts were simply too chaotic for their advanced psychological techniques to handle. Humans had achieved diplomatic advantage through the evolutionary equivalent of mental noise. Their success came not from organized thinking, but from thinking so many things simultaneously that alien telepaths couldn't process the information. Looking back on the incident, diplomatic historians would later identify it as the moment when the galaxy's established civilizations realized that intelligence could take forms they had never imagined. The assumption that advanced species would naturally develop ordered, efficient thought processes had been shattered by the discovery of beings who had achieved comparable technological development through what could only be described as controlled cognitive chaos. Tank Kowalski, the human who had accidentally revolutionized galactic diplomacy by thinking too many thoughts at once, continued his career with the same casual competence that had started the whole affair. His incident reports remained models of professional understatement, consistently describing telepathic breakdowns as minor technical difficulties and diplomatic crises as interesting communication challenges. The Confederation of Civilized Worlds, meanwhile, began the slow process of adjusting to a galaxy where their most fundamental assumptions about intelligence and consciousness had been proven embarrassingly wrong. Their carefully constructed hierarchy of mental sophistication now included a footnote acknowledging that some species achieved advanced civilization through methods that violated every known principle of efficient cognitive development. And somewhere in the diplomatic archives of Station Harmonious VIT, filed under unprecedented psychological phenomena, sat a report that would forever serve as a reminder of what happened when the galaxy's premier mind reader touched a human brain and discovered that organized chaos could be just as effective as organized order, and considerably more entertaining to watch.